Ever notice how some companies seem to just break away from the pack?
Yeah.
Like they're not even playing the same game as everyone else.
Yeah, they're not just trying to be better at what everyone's already doing. They're creating a whole new ball game.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, blue ocean strategy. It's about understanding how those companies find those wide open spaces and, make the competition irrelevant.
Right. Instead of battling it out in those crowded, bloody red oceans,
Yeah.
they're charting a course to these uncontested blue oceans.
We're going to really unpack this. We've got some fascinating insights, mainly from the book Blue Ocean Strategy. A lot of business books, they can get bogged down in jargon.
Absolutely.
So we really wanted to make sure this is clear, it's actionable. We want you to be able to finish this deep dive and actually, apply these ideas.
Absolutely.
So no matter what industry you're in or what your role is, you should be able to walk away with a solid understanding of how blue ocean strategy works.
Yeah. And one of the most important things to understand about blue ocean strategy is that it's really a fundamental shift in thinking. It's not just about being a little bit better than your rivals.
Okay.
It's about changing the entire game.
Okay, so let's break this down, starting with the red ocean part of the equation. I mean, for years and years, most businesses have been focused on competing in those existing markets.
Right. You analyze the competition, you benchmark, you try to grab a bigger piece of the pie.
But the book makes a pretty compelling case that this approach, while it seems like common sense, it's got some serious drawbacks.
It does. When everyone is focused on competing in the same space, what happens? Products and services, they start to look alike. The differences get smaller and smaller.
Right.
And then what do companies do? They start to compete on price.
Which, leads to those dreaded price wars. And no one really wins in a price war, do they?
Not really. It just squeezes profit margins for everyone.
Yeah. You see this all the time, right? Like, look at the streaming services, for instance.
Oh, absolutely.
How many streaming services are there now? They all basically offer the same movies and shows. So what do? They try to get you with, a free month or a lower price or some exclusive content. But the core offering is very similar.
Right. And the same thing happens in so many industries. I mean, look at breakfast cereals or credit cards.
Yeah.
The core offerings are very similar. They end up competing on loyalty points or interest rates, which can be easily copied.
And what's interesting is that the book actually cites studies showing that this is a widespread trend.
Yeah.
Major brands across industries are becoming more and more alike, which means for us as consumers, the main deciding factor often comes down to price.
Right. It's a race to the bottom.
So if everyone's focused on grabbing a bigger share of a market that's not really growing and maybe even shrinking, that's not exactly a recipe for long-term success.
Definitely not.
Okay, so we've talked about the problems of the red ocean, where the waters are crowded and, frankly, a little bloody. Let's switch gears and talk about those blue oceans, those uncharted territories that are full of opportunity. What makes them so different?
I think the key difference is that blue oceans represent new market space. It's not about competing with everyone else for the same customers.
Okay.
It's about creating new demand altogether.
So in a red ocean, you've got your established players, your defined boundaries, you've got the rules of the game, everyone knows how to play.
Exactly.
But blue oceans, those are like the unexplored territories.
They are. And that means you need a completely different mindset. You're not focused on beating the competition.
Right.
You're focused on creating something new.
Okay. And the book acknowledges that while the idea of creating new markets isn't new, there hasn't really been a practical roadmap for how to do it.
There hasn't. I mean, for decades, strategic thinking has been dominated by ideas about gaining competitive advantage. We have Porter's 5 forces. We have ideas about cost leadership and differentiation. But how do you actually create a blue ocean? That's been less clear.
Right. And that's where this book comes in.
Absolutely.
It's about giving you the tools, the frameworks, the strategies to systematically make blue ocean strategy happen. Yeah. So where do we even start?
The book makes this really interesting point about the strategic move. It argues that to really understand high performance, you can't just look at the company as a whole or even industry it's in.
Okay, that's interesting. It seems like we instinctively look at those things. Successful companies, booming industries. What's the issue with focusing on those?
The issue is that companies and industries can change. They can falter. Think about Compaq, for instance. The company itself was eventually acquired, but they made this brilliant strategic move when they created the server industry.
Right.
That was a market-creating event. It had a lasting impact, even though Compaq, the company, didn't survive as an independent entity.
So it's not about the company itself necessarily, it's about the actions they take.
Right. It's about the strategic moves that reshape the landscape.
I like that. So a pivotal decision or a series of coordinated actions, those can be game changers, even if the company itself goes through ups and downs.
Exactly. And the research behind this book is really impressive. They analyzed over 150 strategic moves over a very long period of time,
Wow.
from 1880 to 2000, across over 30 different industries.
Okay, so they're looking at a really broad spectrum of companies and industries over a long time span. What did they find?
They found a consistent pattern in how blue oceans are created. It didn't matter the company, the industry, the time period. The underlying logic was very similar.
That's amazing. So across all these diverse examples, there are some fundamental principles at play. What are some examples of those pivotal strategic moves?
Oh, there are so many great examples. Think about Henry Ford and the Model T. He didn't just make a better horse and buggy.
Right?
He made cars affordable for the masses.
Yeah.
General Motors, when they introduced styled cars in the 1920s, they shifted the focus from pure functionality to emotion and style. Ted Turner and CNN, they created the 24/7 news cycle, compact, as we mentioned, with servers. And in more recent times, think about Starbucks transforming the coffee break into an experience.
Yeah.
Southwest Airlines with their low-cost, no-frills model. Cirque du Soleil reinventing the circus. Salesforce.com pioneering cloud-based software.
You know, out of all those examples, the one that really strikes me is Cirque du Soleil. It feels like they took something that was, I don't know, maybe a little bit stale,
Yeah.
and they completely reinvented it.
Yeah. The traditional circus was, kind of struggling. It was seen as mainly for kids. The competition was all about who could offer a cheaper, smaller version of the same acts.
Right. So how did Cirque du Soleil break out of that mold?
Well, the interesting thing is they didn't try to compete with Ringling Bros and the others.
Okay.
They targeted a completely different customer. They went after adults and corporate clients, people who were willing to pay more for a sophisticated artistic experience.
So they weren't even trying to appeal to the same people who were going to the traditional circus.
Exactly. And they weren't afraid to break the rules. They found a way to offer a high-value, differentiated experience while keeping costs relatively low.
Wait, how do you do both? It seems like you have to choose. Either you're high-end and expensive, or you're low-cost and basic.
They found a way. They looked at what the traditional circus offered, and they eliminated or reduced certain elements, and then they raised and created new elements.
Interesting.
So they kept the core of the circus, the amazing acrobatics and the spectacle, but they infused it with elements from the theater world. Storytelling, artistic richness, original music.
So they took the best of both worlds.
They did, and they famously got rid of the animal acts, which were expensive and, not appealing to everyone.
Yeah.
And instead, they invested in those things that created a truly unique experience.
So by borrowing from the theater and keeping the best parts of the circus, they created something totally new.
Right. They found that blue ocean.
I love this idea of differentiation and low cost together. The book calls this value innovation.
Yes. And this is really at the heart of blue ocean strategy. It's not about making small improvements or offering more for less. It's about creating a leap in value for both the buyer and the company.
Okay.
And you do that by pursuing differentiation and low cost simultaneously.
And it's important to note, this isn't just about technology, right?
It's not. It's about understanding what customers value and finding creative ways to deliver that value.
It makes me wonder, how do you actually find those blue ocean opportunities? The book talks about looking across existing market boundaries and introduces this 6 paths framework.
Yeah. A lot of times, blue oceans are created when companies start to think outside of their traditional industry boundaries. The 6 paths framework gives you a way to systematically explore those boundaries.
Give us a little taste of what that looks like.
Well, one path is to look across alternative industries. Another is to look across strategic groups within your industry. You can look across buyer groups, think about complementary product and service offerings, even look across functional or emotional appeal to buyers and explore how those might be redefined. And finally, consider looking across time, anticipating trends and how they might reshape your industry.
That's fascinating. So you're basically challenging those traditional assumptions about where your market begins and ends.
Exactly.
The book also introduces another tool, the strategy canvas. What's that all about?
The strategy canvas is a visual tool that helps you understand the competitive landscape. You basically map out how different companies in an industry perform on key competitive factors. It helps you see where everyone's focused and where the white spaces are, where the opportunities for differentiation might be.
Okay, so I'm picturing a graph, and each company has a line that shows how they stack up on all these different factors.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that when you look at companies that have created blue oceans, their strategy canvases have a very distinct shape.
What makes them different?
Three things: focus, divergence, and a compelling tagline.
Okay, break that down for us.
Focus means that they're not trying to be all things to all people. They're very clear about what they excel at.
Okay,
Divergence means that their strategy looks different from everyone else. It's not just a slightly better version of the same thing.
got it.
And then a compelling tagline, that just means they can articulate their value proposition clearly and powerfully.
So these are all tools that can help you start to think differently about your market, about where the blue oceans might be hiding. Now, the book also talks about some big global trends that are making this shift to blue ocean thinking even more important.
Absolutely, like the shifting dynamics of global growth.
Yeah. For a long time, we thought of Europe, Japan, and the U.S. as the engines of the global economy. But things are changing.
They are. China, India, Brazil, these are the economies that are driving growth now.
And these countries have huge populations, and their per capita incomes are rising, but they're still relatively low. How does that impact business strategy?
It makes the ability to offer high value at low cost absolutely critical. But the book makes this really important point.
Okay.
It's not enough to just be the cheapest. These consumers are becoming more sophisticated. They have access to information. They have aspirations.
So low cost is important, but it's not the only thing. You still need to differentiate.
You do. You need to find that sweet spot, that balance between value and affordability.
And it's not just companies in those emerging markets that are affected by this, right?
Yeah.
It seems like it's easier than ever for companies anywhere to become global players.
Oh, absolutely. The barriers to entry have come down dramatically.
No, what's driving that?
So many things. It's so much cheaper and easier to set up a professional website. You have crowdfunding platforms that give you access to capital from all over the world. Communication costs have plummeted. You can connect with anyone, anywhere, for next to nothing.
Yeah, think about all the free tools we have now, like Gmail, Skype.
Exactly. And then you have platforms like PayPal that make it safer to do business online. Alibaba.com that makes it easier to find and vet suppliers globally. And then, of course, you have search engines, social media. You can reach a global audience without spending a fortune on advertising.
So it's becoming more and more competitive, more global.
It is, and that's why finding those blue oceans, those uncontested spaces, is more important than ever.
Okay, so we've talked about red oceans, blue oceans, value innovation, global trends. There's one more big idea from the book I want to touch on. It challenges the idea that there are companies or industries that are just inherently excellent that can stay on top forever.
Right. That's a common misconception.
It is. And it makes sense. You know, we look at those iconic companies, those perennial leaders, and we think, wow, they must be doing something magical.
Yeah.
But the book's research suggests that sustained success is more about making the right strategic moves.
It is. And the authors actually looked back at some of the most influential business books of the past, like In Search of Excellence and Built to Last.
Right. Those were huge.
And they found that a lot of the companies that were profiled in those books, they didn't stay on top. Some of them even disappeared.
So even those companies that were seen as models of excellence, they weren't immune to change.
They weren't. And some of their success, it turns out, might have been more about being in the right industry at the right time.
So maybe it's not about building a generically great company. Maybe it's about being able to adapt to make those smart market-creating moves.
Exactly. It's about constantly searching for those blue oceans.
That's a powerful idea. Okay, so let's recap. We started with this concept of red oceans, those crowded competitive markets. We talk about how blue oceans represent uncontested market space, where you create new demand. We explored the idea of value innovation, finding that balance between differentiation and low cost.
Right.
We looked at Cirque du Soleil, that amazing example of how to create a blue ocean. We talked about the importance of looking across existing market boundaries, using tools like the 6 Paths framework and the strategy canvas.
Right.
We discussed how global trends are intensifying competition, making blue ocean strategy even more relevant. And then we explored this idea that sustained success is less about being a great company and more about making smart strategic moves.
Absolutely. It's about being agile, innovative, and always looking for those new opportunities.
Exactly. So as you're thinking about all this, we want to leave you with this question. Who are the non-customers in your market? Who are the people who aren't being served by the existing offerings? Could those non-customers be your blue ocean?
And if you're in an industry where the competition is fierce, where everyone seems to be doing the same thing, could there be a different approach? Could you make the competition irrelevant by creating a blue ocean?
This deep dive has really just scratched the surface. The book goes into much more detail with lots of practical tools and frameworks.
It does. It's definitely worth exploring further.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into blue ocean strategy. We hope you found it valuable.
We did too.
Until next time.
See you then.